Have a listen to this. I spoke earlier with Dr. Bharat Pankania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School and former public health consultant in communicable disease control. We were talking firstly about what SAGE said a few weeks ago, and which was only published and made public a couple of days ago. SAGE calling for a circuit breaker lockdown, and Dr. Bharat told me whether he thought that was the right move.
They have a very good point, and if I may say right or wrong, let me qualify it a little bit more. And I think whoever calls the circuit breaker or whatever acronym we used to use for it, what we are failing to do is talk about what happens afterwards. We really must address this issue. And the issue is, after you have been in a lockdown for 2 to 3 weeks, i.e. your circuit breaker, we need the information, which is when you come out of that restricted movement period, you will exercise extreme caution, not go back to the bad ways of mingling with lots of people, lots of groups, have good mask wearing habits, etc. If we were to do both, I would say it's a very good idea, but on its own, it won't work.
I wonder then if you think there's maybe a risk that if we were to go in for that 2 or 3 week period, and the way that coming out of lockdown has maybe not unreasonably been presented over the last few months as a day of joy and celebration and bacchanalia, the risk then maybe as you present it is that on the day that that circuit breaker ended, the masks would be thrown away, we'd all be rushing back to the pubs as swiftly as possible. Does that risk make it potentially counterproductive, do you think, to have such a circuit breaker?
Absolutely, and this is what I had predicted and said about the lockdown that we endured, because we had the lockdown and then we came out of it and we didn't have the supplementary messages like the virus is still there, it will infect you if you mingle with lots of other groups and you don't wear your masks properly. In fact, we'd never had the mask thing at that point in time. So it is not surprising that the case numbers have gone up, especially after the schools opened.
Well, we saw yesterday in the Commons that there is now parliamentary consent for this system in England of 3 tiers. That, of course, does not mean that areas won't necessarily move from one tier upwards to another, but the principle of the 3-tier system appears to be with us, at least for the foreseeable future. Is it of value?
I think it is a camouflage. It is not going to achieve the end that we want to do, which is reduce again the case numbers. So whilst it looks like the regions are getting their tiers and they can determine where they are, well, they can't. It is the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care who determines what level and what tier you're going to be at. And secondly, the central government has still not relinquished autonomy to the local regions to manage the outbreaks. And what I mean by that is run their own testing and tracing operations. So it is very sluggish when it is done centrally. And this is the big issue. We still don't want the locals, the regions, to run with this.
Why do you think we are here again on the edge of, however this proceeds, much more severe restrictions than anyone hoped for? How big a part does the abject failure of test and trace play in this, do you think, firstly?
A very big part, and it makes me very sad because £12 billion, that's a lot of money, has been spent on a centralized testing and tracing system, which we told them over and over again will not work. And it makes me sad because little by little, drip, 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 they're now allowing local authorities to also set up in tandem their tracing systems. I personally would say, look, give the local authorities much more of the money to do the tracing systems and wind down the centralized tracing system altogether.
Do you have any sense of where that money has gone? Because it is a staggering sum of money. And the first time we talked about it, someone actually texted me to say, are you sure you don't mean 12 million? But no, £12 billion spent on a system which has proved almost entirely unequal to the task for which it was intended. Can you even begin to work out where that money's gone?
It is really painful. And let us put this in perspective for our listeners. The budget for all the GPs in the land plus, think about it, plus the budget for public health. So it's GPs plus public health equals 12 billion. And here we have spent 12 billion on tracing. That is a lot of money. Where has it gone? And why did we do this? It's painful.
Part of the system, presumably part of the test and trace system, would be about ensuring people who are contacted and told to isolate are then, well, compelled to do so. We know that the numbers of people who isolate as they are intended to do, as they're supposed to do, is absolutely tiny, roughly a fifth, I think.
Sad to see this, but the other reasons may also be that they need to put bread on the table, and that has made them go to work. And I found this when I did food inspections and things. You know, the chefs would say they were never ill, but they would come to work because they needed the money. But hey, listen, on that point, when people like myself who ran things locally were to get in touch with local person, getting in touch with another local person, telling them, I am your local doctor telling you to isolate, there was better compliance. So when somebody from Hull tells somebody in Bradford to isolate, they may not. On the other hand, a chap in Bath calling you in Bath and saying, I am from your local authority and I'm telling you, you need to isolate, I think you would get more purchase.
Of course, those calls have to happen in the first place, and in so many cases we know because of the failure in test and trace, those calls have not happened. Is it too late now, Dr. Bharat, if it were possible, by the application of even greater sums of money and previously unseen levels of competence, is it now just too late to get test and trace working?
No, it's never too late, and we've got to look long term because this is going nowhere. So it's not going to end in the next 6 months, and we've got to plan ahead for at least 12, 18 months. We may get, outbreaks sporadically in different regions of the country, and therefore, as I am saying, we enable National Health Service laboratories and local authorities to set up their testing and tracing systems because it becomes a local asset. And then we slowly wind down the central operation. So what I'm asking for is not to spend extra money, but to shift that money to local regions to set up their own test and trace apparatus.
Will we still be having these conversations in 6 months' time, do you think? Are we going to be in the same place?
We will be having these conversations without a doubt. It's not going away in 6 months' time. No way.
That is Dr.